Thank you for joining us for Face the State. I'm Tracy Townsend. President Biden will visit Ohio this week. He'll be in Licking County for the official Intel groundbreaking ceremony, which is set for September 9th. There is a lot of excitement about the facility. There are also concerns, including the possibility of issues with the Intel campus water supply. It will become Columbus's largest consumer of water. 10 TV's Kevin Landers takes those concerns straight to Intel.
Millions of gallons of water from Hoover Reservoir will power Intel's semiconductor plants. And a viewer wanted to know, how clean will that water be when it returns back to the city? Intel estimates it will need 5 million gallons of water a day to turn its blank silicon disks into circuit boards called wafers.
So with semiconductor manufacturing, water is an important ingredient. We use it to clean the wafers. We use it to supply our industrial equipment like cooling towers.
But before a single drop of city water touches a single one of its disks, Intel sends that water through its own water filtration system, which the company says produces pure water.
And that's water that's so clean, it is completely free of any particles or ions or different types of trace minerals, things that are important for us when we're drinking water. But those are things that we can't have when we're using the water to clean wafers because they would damage the product.
When Intel is done with that water, it's returned to the city, which is treated again. This process is part of what Intel calls its net water policy.
So right now, about 80 to 90% of the water that we take in from the water source will be used and returned back to the city. Now, to make up for that balance, that 10 to 20%, we actually partner with nonprofit organizations. We fund their projects to go restore water back to the greater community.
So how clean is that water that's returned to the city?
The water that you send back, can you say with 100% confidence that it is chemical free?
So the water that we use in our factory, before we discharge it, we absolutely treat it to standards set by the EPA, and then we test it before it gets sent back.
Intel plans to be net water positive by the year 2030, which is 5 years after it opens its plant in Licking County. At Hoover Reservoir, Kevin Landers, 10 TV News.
The city of Columbus says the water Intel returns to the city never goes back into the public drinking water and is not allowed to flow untreated into a river system. Intel's future neighbors, Johnstown, is in need of a new mayor and city council president. This is coming after a recall election this week. More than 70% of the people there voted to get rid of both President Marvin Block and Mayor Chip Dutcher. The recall vote is coming after the community raised some questions about leadership. Intel coming to our state puts Ohio in the national spotlight. It's something both candidates for U.S. Senate are talking about.
I think it's a great thing for the state, really, really great thing, and really a great thing for the country because, I'm a big believer that we can't let the Chinese manufacture everything for us. We actually need to have our own native manufacturing capacity, and one of the most important things is computer chips. So I think it'll be good. It'll provide a lot of jobs for people in Ohio, but more importantly, it'll actually make sure we're less dependent on the Chinese long term.
I'm proud to have supported and pushed the CHIPS Act, which is helping make this a reality. But this is huge, and this is going to transform the state and I think take us to the next level. So we're going to continue to push an industrial policy that brings back this kind of high-end manufacturing.
We also asked both of the candidates about the president's plan to forgive up to $20,000 in student loan debt for millions of people, and they both say it's not a good idea.
I think it sends the wrong message. I totally understand we're still paying off my wife's student loans, and the interest rates are outrageous. But the reality of it is we could probably do this in a better way, get those interest rates down, allow students to renegotiate. My problem really with it is one, there's a lot of people who didn't go to college that are struggling right now, and we need to make sure we're helping those people, which is why I think a tax cut is the best way to kind of help everybody. And the second thing is, like, it's not doing anything to rein in the cost of college. We're going to be right back here in 5 or 10 years because people are still taking out loans to pay for expensive college. And, if we're going to do something like this, it needs to be directly tied with reining in college costs.
I think it's a big mistake because it basically asks people who have not gone to college to pay for people who have gone to college. And more importantly, it doesn't fix any of the underlying problems with our college system, which is tuition is way too high, and the colleges have not done really anything to try to fix that problem. So if you look at where a lot of the additional tuition money goes into, administrators are making more money, but are more students getting educated? No. Are students getting a better education? I don't think so. And I think we really need to be honest with ourselves that the college costs have to come down. Bailing out student debt is actually not the way to do that. What I would propose actually is if we want to give student debt forgiveness, we should make the colleges pay for it, because then they might actually be on the hook for some of the problem they're causing.
Senator Sherrod Brown talked about student loan forgiveness during a visit to the Mid-Ohio Food Collective this week. He says debt relief is only part of the plan.
I think that's a first step. I mean, we help, we should be providing free community college. People ought to be able to go to Columbus State or go to LC in her area and not accrue this debt. We're going to need thousands of job training of people trained in the trades for not just the infrastructure bill, but also, of course, Intel in this part of the state. And that means scaling up these building trades, 4 or 5 year apprenticeship programs. We're going to need, this is much more than forgiving loans. It's also making higher education, but not necessarily college, traditional, not necessarily 4-year, but making those kinds of training, that kind of training available to a broad swath of people. And once the president has kind of rolled all that out, I think there will be a very different reception.
A viral social media post claims President Biden's student loan plan will cost taxpayers more than $2,000 each. Brandon Lewis from our National Verify team explains the origins of that estimate.
After President Joe Biden announced his plan to forgive up to $20,000 in federal student loans, many of you began asking us how much the plan is going to cost. Early estimates calculated the government will have to pay about $330 billion. This prompted Senator Ted Cruz to say in a statement opposing Biden's plan that this will cost every taxpayer an average of $2,100. Several Verify viewers then reached out to ask if the plan will raise their taxes by that amount. So let's verify. Will the average taxpayer have to pay $2,100 to cover the cost of the student loan forgiveness program? Our sources are the White House, the Internal Revenue Service Tax Code, Senator Ted Cruz's office, and Andrew Lautz with the nonpartisan National Taxpayers Union Foundation. Cruz's office tells Verify they got that $2,100 number from the National Taxpayers Union Foundation and sent us a link to a blog post written by Lautz. He wrote that if one were to divide an early program estimate of $330 billion by the number of Americans who pay taxes, then the average taxpayer would hypothetically be on the hook for almost $2,100. But that's neither how taxes work nor how the debt forgiveness plan would necessarily be funded, and Lautz acknowledged this in his post. First, taxes in the U.S. are based on a percentage of your income, meaning everyone pays a different dollar figure. Second, since Biden is forgiving the loans using an executive order, he can't raise taxes to pay for his plan. Only Congress can do that.
There are no taxes going up to pay for this policy, but what we do think is important for taxpayers to know is that we all bear the cost of these policies. And so, whether it's through decreased spending in the future, increased taxes, or increased borrowing, taxpayers will ultimately be on the hook for covering the cost of this policy.
So, no, the average taxpayer will not have to pay $2,100 to cover the cost of the student loan forgiveness program. With your Verify, I'm Brandon Lewis.
Remember, if you have something you'd like us to verify, contact us on social media or send an email to verify@10tv.com. Well, this week, lawyers made their case to have an independent review of the documents the FBI pulled from former President Donald Trump's Florida estate. The judge has previously indicated she's leaning toward appointing a special master for the review, but her position could change once the DOJ lays out the evidence. DOJ attorneys told the judge they have already examined more than 500 documents, 64 sets of potentially privileged materials they say were set aside. Now, we asked both candidates for U.S. Senate in our state to weigh in on this FBI investigation.
If presidents break the law, they should be prosecuted like everybody else. And, you know, that they're looking into that. And I would just encourage them to follow the letter of the law, give the former president due process like everybody else would have. And then if he did something wrong, he needs to be prosecuted.
I think the leadership of the FBI has to be more honest with the American people about why they're doing this, about what they're hoping to do.
J.D. Vance has former President Trump's endorsement. We did ask him if the FBI investigation changes his opinion on having that endorsement.
Happy to have the president's support. I think he'll be actually campaigning at least once in Ohio in the next couple of months, and certainly we'll be there with him.
Narcan is being used more and more across our state. Up next, see what's happening to get that life-saving tool in the hands of even more people. Ohio families are struggling to get food on the table, but help is on the way. Find out what the support coming from the Mid-Ohio Food Collective can do to help. This morning, we're getting a look at just how many lives have been saved with Narcan in Columbus. From the start of 2021 until July of this year, Columbus firefighters responded to more than 4,000 calls where they used Narcan. That's the drug that revives people who have overdosed. That drug was instrumental in saving a man's life back in May. Brianna Cruz is one of CODA's strategic responders. She was called to check on a man who may have overdosed while using opioids. After CPR and 2 full boxes of Narcan, Cruz says that man is alive today.
I'm hoping that I saved a lot of heartache and heartbreak and, really gave him and those who loved him another chance.
Well, incidents like that are why Narcan is available for public access through the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board. Rescue kits are available at multiple CODA locations throughout Columbus. And those kits were also available for free at several distribution locations this week for National Overdose Awareness Day. And that's where we met David Brown. Brown knows firsthand how important it is to make Narcan accessible. He says someone once gave him a drug with unknown substances in it, and Narcan saved his life.
Narcan was the saving grace. And my mom was so happy that I was alive, scared her to death.
And Brown says everyone should pick some up if they have the opportunity, especially if you know someone who is struggling. According to one local expert, other treatment options can be just as vital for preventing overdose deaths.
Another trend I would argue that you see is a lot more access to medication-assisted treatment in different various clinics and telemedicine options that have popped up for these patients.
In fact, a new study from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports telehealth services have really made a huge impact. Patients in the study who used telehealth stayed in treatment longer and reduced their risk of medically treated overdose. Since the pandemic, services like that have become much more common. There are some resources to tell you about that are available online right now. You can visit beatthestigma.org for resources provided by the Ohio Opioid Education Alliance. This week, Franklin County commissioners approved $55,000 for the HOPE Task Force. HOPE is an acronym for Heroin Overdose Prevention and Education, and it comes from grant money from the Ohio Attorney General Law Enforcement Diversion Program to the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. The Franklin County Commissioners also voted to approve and provide funding to the Mid-Ohio Food Collective and other pantries across Central Ohio.
For people to get involved with your local food pantry in your community. They could use the dollars, they could use the food, they can use food drives, but most importantly, they need your help, in making sure that no resident of Franklin County goes without.
Mid-Ohio says the biggest challenge next to volunteers is struggling with the supply chain issues and getting food supply. The $2.5 million resolution should help meet the high demand, at least for this fall. Senator Sherrod Brown, again, he visited the Mid-Ohio Food Bank this week to talk about the next farm bill. The previous farm bill was passed in 2018 as the Agriculture Improvement Act. It provided farmers with funding, invested in local food businesses, and established a program to make healthy food more accessible.
Farm bill, if done right, will focus on getting food will focus much on local foods without the transportation costs, and moving around the country getting local foods, fresher foods, more nutritious foods on people's tables. It will increase the prosperity of rural Ohio, which is always struggling, and it will obviously help those families.
One item Senator Brown says he's considered is free school lunches for children, but he says he will need more bipartisan support for that to successfully make it to the final draft of the bill. You can help feed our neighbors here in Columbus. Life Care Alliance needs more hands to run their Meals on Wheels program. Day-to-day staffing challenges have been delaying routes, and it may get worse during the Labor Day holiday weekend.
Holidays are always a little bit of an adventure, but it's also the holidays are a great time, and the weekends are a great time for families or individuals to go out and deliver meals.
All you have to do to get started is head to the Life Care Alliance website. We've posted a link for you at 10tv.com/featured links. Columbus is going to receive millions of dollars in federal funding to help make housing more affordable. We asked Mayor Andrew Ginther how it's going to be spent. We're seeing more and more unionization in Ohio. Up next, what group is pushing to organize and who's supporting them? Here in Ohio, some employees are calling for change in their respective workplaces. Columbus Museum of Art workers are looking to unionize, citing unfair labor practices during the pandemic. 10 TV's Ashley Bornanson spoke with them.
A lot of it is wanting to have more of a say in decisions that are made at the museum. We're the staff that is here every day. We're interacting with the public.
Nicole Romey says CMA Workers United is calling for fair wages to retain staff members and safer working conditions for the frontline workers, a condition that they say was compromised during the pandemic.
I think a big part of it was the fact that our staff was reduced by a significant number. Our staff was asked to be in the building prior to when vaccines were available.
The group is joined by support from other local union efforts, including WEX Workers United, who say nonprofit workers are facing what they call the passion tax.
I think all of us do love what we do, and we want these better working conditions so that it can be sustainable, so that these can be our livelihoods truly in addition to our passion.
And the Columbus Education Association.
A union equals the playing field. The bosses have a lot of the power, and this is a way for the workers to get their voice heard, and it's important that you listen to the workers' voice.
All this comes as nationwide unions are on the rise.
In the last 9 months, there's been a 58% increase in the number of petitions filed, and the number of workers organized has also increased. A lot of that activity has been in the retail sector and the nonprofit sector.
Kate Bronfenbrenner of Cornell's School of Industrial and Labor Relations says unsafe pandemic working conditions was the final straw for many workers.
Workers, it was one thing to sacrifice when it was hard times. It's another thing if the sacrifice means risking your life and the life of your family.
In a statement, Columbus Museum of Art says in part, the museum is invested in participating in a fair and respectful bargaining process, ensuring all staff have an opportunity to make their voices heard. In Columbus, Ashley Bornanson, 10 TV News.
We are going to continue to monitor the status on the negotiation process, and we'll keep you updated on air and, of course, online. $146 million is going to go toward keeping the low-income home energy assistance program going. Now, the state controlling board approved the funding this week. It's also going to provide rental assistance. At the same time, the city of Columbus is getting $2 million in federal money for affordable housing. The competitive federal grant was distributed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it provides funding to the city through the year 2025. Funding from the federal grant is expected to serve more than 150 properties and educate 8,000 residents on how to keep homes safe. 10 TV's Kevin Landers talked with Mayor Ginther about this grant.
How competitive was this grant, and where will that money go specifically to help these low-income families have a stable home?
We're excited, and we want to thank President Biden, Secretary Fudge. She's a former mayor, so she knows exactly how important this is. This is really part of our overall housing strategy under the Preserve pillar. We want folks that are in their homes to be able to age in place. And as you know, the housing market is off the charts here in Central Ohio, and we want to make sure that there are resources available that folks that are seniors are able to invest in their properties so they can stay and then keep them up to code, make sure they're safe, making sure that they're able to make improvements to the home, that they'll be able to continue to age in place there maybe when they have limited mobility or other challenges with accessibility. So we're really excited about this very competitive process. We're excited to have won it for the people of Columbus. We think it's going to make a significant difference in hundreds of homeowners' ability to stay in their homes and enjoy, retirement.
This Labor Day holiday weekend, lots of families are taking the time to get away. Your travels, though, can be close to home, especially if you enjoy what's called heritage tourism. The National Trust for Historic Preservation in the United States defines it as traveling to experience the places, artifacts, and activities that authentically represent the stories and people of the past. And heritage tourism can include cultural, historic, and natural resources. I was really excited to moderate a conversation at this week's Columbus Metropolitan Club luncheon with two terrific experts on this. Napoleon Bell, who is a co-founder of the Heritage Tours, and Ohio History Connection CEO Megan Wood. Now, you may remember we talked with Wood, who's the first female CEO of the History Connection. She and her team are working to get Ohio's Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. With the Everglades National Park, the Grand Canyon here in the U.S., and internationally, locations including Stonehenge.
What I want to say about Stonehenge is that if you go to Newark Earthworks in the Octagon, there's a little circle on the side, and Stonehenge can fit in that little tiny circle. So, it's like what we have is even bigger. It's this highest designation of universal human value, and it just, the outstanding universal value. Yeah, there we go. It's this expression of human genius. And if you're not familiar with the Octagon in Newark, there's an 18.6-year cycle of the moon, which I am not going to explain right now. But there's a time in that cycle where the moon rises and sets at the northernmost and southernmost point. And 2 points in that octagon are, align with that perfectly. So it just shows the genius of the culture, whose remains that we live among.
And then do we vote on this next year, or do you have some special designation?
There's a committee of UNESCO that votes on it, and they'll vote next summer. So we submitted our application, which is really like a very long and technical book that we submitted, and our application was accepted, and they'll be voting on it next June, probably.
And you already explained that Stonehenge could fit into the space here, so I'm going to throw some more shade. Who's our competition?
I don't know that it's a zero-sum, that there's only so many votes. So I don't know if we're not necessarily up against, they can add as many as they want. Mm-hmm. I think we're still the best, but no other World Heritage Sites in Ohio. And the closest ones are Cahokia Mounds and some of the Frank Lloyd Wright sites. So
It's all about having that international draw here. Those Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks were used by the indigenous Native Americans as places of ceremony, social gathering, trade, worship, and honoring the dead. Just amazing. Something you ought to get out to see. We hope you have a great holiday weekend. We appreciate that you've joined us here today. Have a great week.